There we go. David, hello. How are you? Sorry, I had a little bit of a technical hitch there.
Hey, Graham. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thanks very much for coming and taking part in the show today. Now, I've got to tell you, how's the weather in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania?
Well, the sun is out today, but it's 60 degrees.
16 degrees. Here, 60. Sorry, you're in Fahrenheit. We're in Celsius.
Yes.
So in Celsius, we're at 27 here in Worcester Park, just outside of London.
Yeah, so our weather has been basically good but chilly.
Okay.
And we even had snow a week ago. So
okay,
not a big one, but it was still snow.
So how's lockdown at Steely Hill?
Well, we're very fortunate that we have some space around the house, so we can, get outside, work in the yards. Plural, and the forest and the garden and the orchard. So, we're very fortunate here.
Well, there's plenty for you to do, I know, from your wonderful property out there. Well, look.
Yeah, you want to come over and help?
Yeah, I'd love to come over, but I don't think my government would allow me to do that just at this moment in time. But I have to say, David, you've got quite an impressive CD. With a successful career as a freelance musician in New York City, performances with the New York City Ballet, the New York Philharmonic, and numerous Broadway shows, to name but a few. As a recording artist, you've made over 1,000 recordings for radio and TV commercials, as well as soundtracks for movies and TV shows. I'm exhausted just thinking about it. What's your fondest memory of that particular time?
Well, there are a couple of dates that come to mind. The day after Christina was born, I got a call to do a date for Huggies diapers. And but what was interesting about it is that it was a new set of producers that were basically women coming back in the workforce. And so a very simple commercial that should have taken maybe 2 or 3 takes. We did about 50 takes on. We went way over budget. They went way over budget. I, of course, made some money, and so, there've been a lot of other good ones that I've done, some that didn't go so well. Most of the times in that recording business, it was the arranger would get the call, say 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, to put the music together for a recording session the next day. And so they would decide who they would like to play, make sure they were available, and then write the music. And the copyist would stay up all night and copy the music. And then we'd walk in the studio at 10 o'clock and it'd all be there for us to go.
Yeah, I remember doing that myself at one time.
Yeah,
go on.
So I had one commercial. It was a company in Chicago that booked me like 2 months in advance, which is very unusual. And so they called a month later, are we still on? A week later, so for 2 months, we want you to play tenor saxophone. I said, okay, I'll do that. So we get into the studio and they put the music in front of me and they say, now we want you to sound like Paul Desmond. And I said, you understand Paul Desmond was an alto saxophone player, not a tenor. Oh, really? So, you do what you can.
Yeah.
So I don't know why those are the ones that stand out of all of the ones that I've had, but
yeah, but what a wonderful time you had in New York there as a professional musician. But then in 1998, you moved all the way to Lehigh, to the Lehigh University Band, and you became the professor of practice and the director of the band program.
Right.
And you've done an incredible job there in the time that you've been, and you've transformed, the symphonic wind band, which I've got wonderful memories of conducting myself, and all the other bits that you've done. What is the moment? What do you think is the most standout moment for you as director of bands?
The 2018 London New Year's Day parade.
Oh wow!
That's
wait a minute. I think was that it?
That's it right there.
Wow! How did I do that?
And right in the background, that's our president of the university, that gray-haired gentleman. He actually came and with the band and came to the parade and marched with us part of the way after he was interviewed by CNN. It was really great. Yeah, but I haven't seen that picture. That's
okay. But you also did some wonderful work in recordings, and I had the pleasure of being involved in one or two with you. And the latest one that you wonderfully put together was your symphonic one, where you commissioned Martin Ellerby, and I just happen to have a copy here.
Yeah, there it is.
Symphony. How about that?
Right.
And if anybody would like to have a purchase of one of these wonderful CDs, you can do so if you go and visit my webpage. Okay, so go and do that. But tell us a little bit more about this wonderful CD, David.
Well, the Wind Ensemble, when I took over in 1998, had 12 people in it. And so I built it up for the first performance to have 47. And we're now at about the standard 50 to 55 size. And I've always thought it was important to do new music as part of the students' education and part of the mission of the Wind Ensemble. And so we managed to raise some money. And so I contacted Martin Ellerby and I said, here's how much money I have. Can you write us a piece? And so he and I went back and forth quite a bit on what he wanted to write and what I wanted him to write. And you know Martin very well.
Yeah, I do.
And actually, I met Martin through you. And Martin likes to write pieces that are connected to a place. Paris Sketches, Venetian Spells, From Kitty Hawk to the Moon, Cries of London, those various things. And when I started talking with him, I wanted a piece that was more of a generic, more that had a more lasting, value, not just tied to a specific place. And so I talked him into writing a symphony for us. And so he said, okay, tell me what symphonies you admire. And so I gave him a list of 4 symphonies that he should listen to. And then he listened to each of them, and then he came back to me and what do you like about each one? And so, over the space of, 6 months or so, he narrowed down what I thought would be good for the Wind Ensemble to play. And he wrote this fantastic symphony. It's really, really good. It's in 5 movements. It's called Symphony in 5 Movements. And the middle movement is really the slow, introspective movement. It's inspired by a stained glass window in where he lives, a church that's been decommissioned. But he managed to go in and take some pictures. And one of the stained glass windows, they were, I guess, paid for by the parents of World War I soldier who was killed during the war, and it shows him kneeling, taking communion or something like that. And it's a fantastic symphony. And I have to say that you also contributed a piece to that concert, which starts that CD, called Lehigh, and is now in the standard repertoire of the 97. So
I'm really honored and flattered about that. And it was great fun writing an uplifting piece. And I think the band did enjoy playing it.
Yes, they do enjoy playing it.
Yeah, but I think that one of the great things that you've done whilst you've been at Lehigh is you started doing some really big research projects. And the music of the American Civil War was one of them. And I've got a picture here, which you can see there, a band from the American Civil War, which is quite a phenomenal picture. And I think you really did enjoy being a part and building and finding all the information about the American Civil War, and of course producing wonderful CDs about it. What do you remember about that time and that research program?
Well, the reason I got interested in it is I heard a recording of a saxophone band, which would have been the band from the Civil War. If you go back to the previous picture, you have the band, if you can. Yes, this picture, you'll see that in the middle there's a guy with a big brass instruments up.
Yeah, I can
well,
see that.
Actually, and all of those instruments they're called over-the-shoulder saxhorns. So what they would do is they would put it over their shoulder and the mouthpiece would hear, and the bell would be pointing backwards. There we go.
Okay.
And so that when they marched and played in front of the regiment, everybody behind them could hear them play. So the sound was actually being directed back toward the soldiers. And the saxhorns are conical and they're very mellow sounding. And I just loved the sound of the band. And so I started researching, what was the music available, what were the bands like, and that sort of thing. And I discovered, and my original idea was to take a tune, a band arrangement, and follow that band arrangement through various bands. And that's when I discovered there are only 7 sets, complete sets of band music from that period. So I changed my focus to really look at those 7 sets of music, find out what was there. I did a preliminary catalog of it. And then what I did was that I followed the history of each of those bands, how the musicians were enlisted in the band, their experiences during the Civil War, where they were, and then what happened to them afterwards. So it was a lot of fun, and I really learned a lot about what bands were like then, and they were quite important.
Yeah. It was a great project that you did. Now, I think we're getting close to the time when we sort of met up, and here's a very interesting and probably to some people a surprising picture that I've just put up there, which is the famous Twin Towers. And of course, we all know the story of 9/11. Well, after 9/11, which was a terrible, terrible tragedy, as we all know, Her Majesty the Queen directed that the band of the Coldstream Guards should perform the American national anthem outside Buckingham Palace, and in front of the American ambassador to the UK, and the Duke of York were there. And this image actually sent a massive message around the world. Just one little piece of music played by the Queen's Guards band outside Buckingham Palace sent waves across the world to say that we, the United Kingdom, stand firmly shoulder to shoulder with our cousins in the United States of America. That just shows you, David, the real power of music and how music can be used to get across a message. Now, I happen to have found a nice little clip here, and I want you to watch at the end of this the reaction from the anchorman at ABC.
And to continue, here is something visually which we've been talking about in our coverage earlier today, which I must tell you we were really looking forward to. We saw a report earlier today that at Buckingham Palace in London, where Queen Elizabeth II lives when she is in London, the Coldstream Guards, who change the guard, not the Coldstream Guards, but they change the guard every day at Buckingham Palace, as we know, and we are told that at the request of the Queen, the Coldstream Guards band played the Star-Spangled Banner. Let's listen. Whew.
Indeed.
Quite a yeah, indeed, quite a thing from them. But just that message being sent out meant an awful lot to everybody. I was the director of music that had the privilege and pleasure of conducting that particular wonderful piece of your national anthem, and it also started a flurry of emails, and I received emails from literally around the world, and they were coming in thick and fast into the Ministry of Defence, and there was all sorts of people wrote to me, and a number of those, they were all important, of course, but a number of those really stood out. They really stood out on the page, and one of them came from a young man called David Diggs. And you wrote to me, and you thanked me for the performance of the American National Anthem on that particular day. And I wrote back to you and I said, well, actually, we're going to be in New York City in October. It was hastily arranged between our two governments for the Coldstream Guards Band and the Scotch Guards Pipes and Drums to be in New York City. So we went to New York City, and I arranged to meet you. And that's the first time we met. Remember, we went and had dinner.
Yeah, we didn't finish until about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I know.
Was the 3 days later for you.
Yeah, I think the first of many, David, actually. So anyway, so eventually in 2003, you came over to London, and I had the privilege of taking you and Grace to see the Queen's birthday parade, known as Trooping the Colour. And I think it's the first time you'd seen quite a spectacle of, there we are. Yes. And I'm in the middle of that. And we really did enjoy hosting you there. And whilst we were there and we were talking, I suddenly discovered all of the work that you'd done with the American Civil War and how you really loved musical history. And of course, the Coldstream Guards Band are steeped in musical history. And the Coldstream Guards Band goes back to 1785. Well, it actually goes back before there, because as you know, because you did the research, David, is that Lord Cathcart commanded the band, because he commanded the regiment, and the regiment was paid for by the commanding officer. The band, sorry, was paid for by the commanding officer. And one particular day, he got very incandescent, upset with the band. Now, what was all that about, David?
Well, the officers wanted to have a party at Greenwich, which I gather at that time was quite a trip. Yeah. Nowadays, you just get on the Jubilee line and you're there. And Jubilee, right? Do I have the right line?
Yes, you do. Well done.
And so the band were civilians, and they, of course, in addition to they were hired per service, I guess, to do changing of the guard and whatnot. And so they were, well, we've got our job in the theaters, and so we're not available to go play your party in Greenwich. And of course, he got really upset, and he went to Frederick, Duke of York, and said, the band should be part of the military. They should belong to the regiment and be available to do whatever the officers wanted them to do. And so Frederick probably talked to his father, George III, and they agreed that they would go. Frederick would go over to London, over to Hanover, where the ancestral home for the Georges and Frederick and whatnot was, and bring a band over from Hanover. So we brought a band of 12 people over, and they were enlisted into the Coldstream Guards. The term is called attested. Yeah. So in May of 1785, they became official members of the Coldstream Guard Regiment, afoot, as it was called in the things. And from that time forward, the band started to become part of the units of the military. They became soldiers. And so the Coldstream Guards were the premier group and at the forefront of making that happen for the British military.
Yeah, but I think our Londoners were not really impressed with these 12 German musicians coming over to take the place of the 6 or so British musicians that were there. In fact, the Times newspaper, if I remember, was they used the word incandescent about saying that these fine musicians should be retired on half pay for the rest of their mortal lives. And when the new musicians, the attested musicians, arrived, they performed outside St James's Palace, and there were panics and near enough we could say riots, nearly. However, the band started to play, and everybody realised that this was a phenomenal band, and it set the benchmark, the standard for military music in the future. But anyway, after we'd looked at all of that and we did all the research, one of the things that I'm very proud to say is that Christopher Ely was the first bandmaster of the Colchian Guards in 1785. I retired as the director of music of the Colchian Guards in January 2012 as only but the 12th director of music of the Colchian Guards. I think that's continuity.
Well, maybe the 11th, you know, we have that one. We have Wilma that we
we got. So also we started looking at music in London starting at 1785 and running through. I've got a bit of a grainy pitch here, but here it is. It's the Age of Elegance. So this is CD number 2, David, isn't it? And we did 5 CDs starting in 2004,
yes,
which is quite a phenomenal achievement. And probably I think it's the fullest record of British military music in London from 1785 to around 2010. But what a great lot of fun it was doing it.
Yes.
So I'd just like to once again, David, and I have done before, but publicly now here on channel KT4, is to thank you for all that work that you did. And we had great fun doing all the orchestrations, recording it. The first one, if you remember, the music of Christopher Ely, we looked at this and thought this music would have been performed at St James's Palace.
Absolutely.
And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could record in St James's Palace? And I said, that's never going to happen. So I went to my regimental adjutant, Sir Edward Crofton, and I said to Sir Edward, you know, can you write to Buckingham Palace and ask the question? And he did, and they said yes. So we took over St James's Palace for 2 wonderful days. Or was it 3? I can't remember now.
I think it was 3 days.
Yeah, I think it was 3. Yeah, 3 days. And we recorded the first of those 5 albums. So I think that's a really, really memorable thing to be doing. And all this work led for something else, because you became one of the very few non-British people, one British person, to become an honorary member of the Royal Society of Musicians.
Yes, that was very, very special.
Yeah, and
it's very special.
And I believe you still considered to. You're still doing some work with them, and you've done some research projects with them.
Yes, they have a thing called the dinner marches, which it's starting. Well, at least when Haydn was there, so the 1790s, was it 1792? I think Haydn came and visited London. They would have a big dinner, like a gala dinner, as a fundraiser for the pension. Well, the Royal Society is kind of a pension fund, insurance organization. It's got a kind of a hybrid position. It's very important to musicians, and the benevolence that they supply to musicians continuing now. They're very active now with the COVID-19, helping musicians that are out of work. And so Haydn was in London, and he heard that they were having this gala dinner. So he arranged a march for them. It's technically the Duke of Wales March, but Prince of Wales March. But he rearranged it for the Royal Society, and they have the original manuscript of it in Haydn's hand. And so that was played at that annual dinner. Then the next year, someone else wrote a march, and then the next year, someone else wrote a march. And so over a period of time, they had 6 dinner marches that were played off and on at various gala dinners, which is their fundraisers. And so I got permission from the Royal Society to go in and make new editions of all 6 marches so they could be played by contemporary instruments. And then with the the help of the East Winds Quintet, which is our faculty woodwind quintet at Lehigh, and a large collection of our students, we recorded all 6 marches with the correct instrumentation. From very small, about 12 people, up to about 30 people for the Cipriani. And then I went into the studio, mastered recording, and made it available to the Royal Society. So the Royal Society now has contemporary copies of the marches, which they can sell or loan or whatever they decide to do with. And they also have CDs of the 6 marches that they can sell or give out, whatever they want to do with them.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful work that you've done there, David. So I've got to ask this question.
I have to say that Prince Charles is now has taken over the duties of as the royal for the, guess that's the title, for the Royal Society.
Yes.
And
he's the patron. He's the patron.
Okay. So he was at the opening of their new building, and they were telling him about the marches, and they couldn't find the CD. So they wrote me and said, we were talking to Prince Charles and we'd like to send him a copy, and could you write a little something how this all came about? So I wrote him a nice letter and sent him a copy of the performances, the CD, and eventually got a thank you note from his secretary. So Prince Charles is aware of them as well.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing, isn't it? So, David, I've got to find out, what are you working on at present?
Trying to figure out how to have rehearsals.
Yeah, because I was going to say one of the questions, is COVID-19 for musicians has really created, it has to for everybody, and it's a tragedy across the world. But how do musicians get back? I think there are a number of issues here, because you have to look at it from a couple of perspectives, don't you? You have to look at it, one from practice, your social distancing, how you're going to practice. I have to say, by the way, David, I'm just going to cut across myself here, that we celebrated victory in Europe a couple of weeks ago, and the Royal British Legion had a show that was on television, and I was amazed and absolutely as proud as punch to see that there was a band, social distancing, as a marching band, performing on that particular show. So actually performance can be achieved in a marching band for distance. I think as a symphonic wind orchestra, I think there's a lot more challenges, but also in London, there's a perception that, of course, you've got to look at concerts, theatres, and all of those events that are happening. And somehow we've got to persuade people when it's right, that it's safe to go back to the theatre.
Absolutely.
Safe to go back and sit in concert halls so that musicians can do what they do best, and that's perform on the public stage.
Yeah, it's going to be a real challenge to get the audiences back. I, of course, have been following some blogs and other information, news sources, because of how it's going to affect us at Lehigh to get our bands back together. Our spring semester was totally canceled.
Yep.
We had spring break the second week of March, and what we did before spring break was the playing of each of the groups. And so the Vienna Philharmonic did a study about spray and,
Yep.
environmental things and whatnot. And I think one of the things that stood out to me, it was somewhat wry, is that the conductor can't be infected.
Okay.
Well, that's not the main issue, folks.
No, it's not.
We're worried about the musicians, but they did find that about 6 feet is how, particularly for flutes, how far the, whatever you want to call that, can go. College Band Directors Association is being part of
spray. I think is the
spray.
word.
Okay.
That's the word, spray.
Okay.
Yeah.
College Band Directors Association is part of a study. It's going to be a very comprehensive study about what are the effects, what can you do to mitigate them, in the hopes that we can come up with some way to rehearse. Currently at Lehigh, the only place that we have that's big enough to get enough social distancing is our concert hall.
Yeah.
And that's if you put the band, orchestra, or the choir in the seats of the hall and the conductor is on the stage. And I actually made that recommendation to our chairperson. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know if we're going to have school in the fall. I mean, meeting in person school would definitely be online teaching. But that's a challenge that we're looking at now. And then, of course, we really relook at the musical aspects of what you want to do. You know, I'm accustomed as a player and as a conductor of having the players next to each other so that they can somewhat hear and balance, and and you put them 6 feet apart, stretched out in a however big, I mean, wherever you have a space big enough to put them. It's not going to be the same experience. And knowing college students, and they're not professionals, they play for the fun of it mostly, particularly at Lehigh. They're going to feel very isolated if they're 6 feet away from people on either side of them. They're going to feel like they're the only person they're playing. So, and that can be pretty scary. You're not, even as a professional, sometimes that can be scary. But
but I think, David, we need to look at with rose-tinted glasses to the future. And we'll come through the other side of it. Hopefully, as a planet, we'll come through stronger. As people, as communities, will come through stronger.
Absolutely.
And David, as always, it's been a huge pleasure to talk with you. And it's I look forward to being able to travel over to your side of the pond, and hopefully we can meet again soon, and I can have the privilege of coming into Lehigh University. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Diggs.
Thank you, Graham.
My pleasure. And next time on Channel KT4, I'll be joined by 3 members of the Association of Concert Bands. It looks like being a fun chat show. So make sure to tune in on Friday, the 29th of May at noon, Eastern Daylight Savings, and 5 p.m. in the UK. Stay alert and stay alive. And bye now.